Today's story is about a church in Memphis that begins to experience very strange phenomena. Now, at first, church administrators believe that whatever's happening here is just a series of pranks, and basically everybody writes it off. But one church staff decides to look more closely, and he discovers something much darker was going on there. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, for the next several days, sneak into the Like Button's kitchen after hours and add increasingly large portions of food that they hate to their fridge and their pantry. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. One morning in late February of 1982, a 42-year-old man named Sam Drash was standing inside of his office, which was inside of a United Methodist Church building in Memphis, Tennessee. And as he stood there, he was frustrated. His arms were crossed, and he was staring down at an empty bowl on his desk. So Sam was the headmaster of an elementary school that was inside of this church. This church building was massive. It not only had, the main chapel and this elementary school, but there were also dozens of offices. There was a full gymnasium, a full kitchen, laundry facilities. I mean, this place was massive. As for Sam, he spent the majority of his time in his office doing administrative work for the elementary school. And because he was at his computer all the time, just kind of doing this busy work, he found himself wanting to snack a lot. And so he needed like a healthy snack to binge on. And he found, mixed nuts were the thing he liked to eat the most that were, sort of healthy. And so he always had this big bowl of mixed nuts on his desk that he always kept full. But this morning, when he walked into his office, this big bowl of mixed nuts was inexplicably empty. And he knew the night before he had filled the bowl up, and he didn't come in between last night and now, so, who ate the mixed nuts? And so feeling pretty annoyed, he's like, all right, somebody must have come in here and taken them, okay, fine. And so he left his office and headed to the kitchen to get some more snacks. When Sam went inside the kitchen, he saw the church's cook was at the counter cutting vegetables. And so Sam said hello to the cook and then walked right over to the pantry where the snacks were. He opened it up and he looked at the shelf where the mixed nuts always were, and the entire container was gone. And in addition to that, Sam's scanning the other shelves and seeing that a lot of snacks that he knew were typically in this pantry were also gone. It was like someone had raided the entire pantry. And so Sam, he turns to the cook and goes, hey, was there like an event here last night where they would have handed out a lot of snacks? Because I feel like all the snacks are gone here. And the cook, who at that point was still chopping vegetables, he stopped, put the knife down, and he turned and looked at Sam and said, I'm glad somebody else has noticed this, because for the last month, food has been going missing for no reason. I don't understand what's happening here. The cook told Sam that at first, the food that was going missing was pretty minor. It was really just snacks and just here and there, not a big deal. But he said more and more lately, it wasn't just snacks going missing. It was actually stuff from the fridge. And he told Sam that, at night, he put a padlock on the fridge specifically to keep people out of it, in particular the kids, who would come in and like raid the fridge. He's like, it's locked. But, last night he said he put a ham in the fridge, this whole ham, he put it in the fridge, and then he shut and locked the fridge. And then this morning when he came in, he opened the fridge up and the ham was gone. And he literally walked over to the fridge, opened it up, and showed Sam the shelf where this huge ham was supposed to be, but now it was just gone. The cook told Sam that he had already spoken to church administrators about this strange issue, when he flagged this morning that this ham was now gone. And while they said they'd look into it, they admitted to the cook that they really didn't know what to think of it. It was just very confusing how this was even happening. At this point, Sam was just totally irritated because now he knew, one, he would have to go do his admin work without any snacks, but two, it was pretty clear that, some of the kids, probably from his school, had likely begun sneaking into the kitchen and taking snacks. And also very likely, they must have gotten a hold of the key to the padlock on the fridge, and now they're kind of escalating, stealing whole hams from the fridge. I mean, this whole thing was just totally annoying and really bad behavior. And so Sam figured he would likely have to deal with the kids at some point. But Sam told the cook, look, for right now, what I'll do is I'll also talk to administrators and I'll have somebody come in here and they'll replace the lock on the fridge. A few days later, on March 3rd, Sam walked into the church building and began heading down the hallway towards his office. For the past couple of nights, things have been quiet at the church. Sam had the lock replaced on the fridge, and it seemed like that had solved the issue of things going missing in the fridge. And also Sam had replaced his mixed nuts supply, and nobody had taken any. So it seemed like, whatever was going on, maybe there was a prankster or something that clearly, changing the locks and maybe putting some additional pressure on the church administrators to let people know to stop doing this had had its effect, because things were back to normal. But as Sam was walking down the hallway, he passed by the kitchen, which was open. And as he passed by, the cook who was in there saw Sam and said, "Hey, come in here, I gotta show you something." And so Sam stopped, he goes into the kitchen, and the cook is standing by the fridge, and the fridge is open. And he can kind of see there's a look on the cook's face like, "Hey, you gotta see this." And so Sam kind of has a sense of where this is going. He walks over to the cook, and the cook points to an empty spot in the fridge. And he said, "Look, right there, there should have been several bottles of soda right there, and they're gone." And so Sam's like, okay, that's not good. Clearly this is still happening. But the cook is like, "No, this is after the locks have been changed. There's only a handful of people that have access to the keys, and it's like church administrators who definitely would not be taking this soda. So I don't understand how this is even happening." And Sam's like, "Yeah, you're right. That does sort of change things. How is this happening?" But before Sam could ask any follow-up questions, the cook was like, "This isn't all either. This is just one thing I've noticed. The other thing that's going on now, ever since we changed the locks, is someone is also beginning to mess with my personal stuff." He told Sam that every day when he was done in the kitchen, when he would leave, he would always leave his work shoes and his apron in one spot in the kitchen. He would leave them right there, he would leave, and then the next morning when he would come back, his things would be right there, he'd put them back on, and he'd get to work. But ever since changing the locks, when he had come into the kitchen, his stuff would be moved. His shoes at one point were on the counter when he came in, and his apron was put somewhere else. But nobody was stealing from him. It was like they were just messing with him. And the cook said to Sam, "I just don't get it. Why are they doing this? This can't be satisfying. They don't even see my reaction to this stuff. What are they doing just messing with my stuff?" Sam was equally baffled by this. And he just told the cook, "Look, I'll talk to administrators again and see if there's anything we can do, change the locks again. I don't know, but I'll see if anybody can help us here, because I really don't understand what's happening." And so Sam left the kitchen and headed down the hallway towards his office with the intent to go in there and write up a report about what had just happened and hand it over to the administrators. But when Sam walked into his office, he noticed there was something sitting right in the middle of his desk that had not been there the night before. It looked like a paper towel. And so Sam, he walks up and he sees it is a paper towel, but there's a note scrawled on this paper towel, sort of like hectic, chaotic handwriting, like somebody was in a rush writing this note. And clearly they've left this note for him. And so he sits down at his desk and he begins to read the note, and it's totally upsetting. The note referenced the recent murder of this 15-year-old girl named Leslie Gaddis, who had been killed not far from the church in Memphis, Tennessee. This case was all over the news, and so Sam and basically everybody at the church had heard about it. And so he's seeing that the note is referencing this girl, but more than that, the note insinuated that there was something in the church's attic that would change everybody's understanding of this murder case. And so Sam's like, is this a prank? Like an awful prank? Are the kids who are stealing food and messing with the cook's stuff, are they also responsible for this? Sam's thinking, this murder case was all over the news. Everybody, including the kids in this church, had heard about it. This girl had been abducted from her bedroom in the middle of the night. It was horrible. And he's thinking, maybe this really is a prank. But at the same time, Sam's thinking that if this note is true, that there is some horrible thing or some clue or evidence up in the attic that might be useful to police about this case, he had a responsibility to share it with the authorities. And so even though he knew he might be overreacting a little bit to this, he called the police and said, "Hey, you gotta come down here and look at this." And so sure enough, later that day, police showed up to the church, they met with Sam, they read the note, and they went into the attic. And they searched it extensively, but they didn't find anything connected to the Leslie Gaddis murder case. They didn't really find anything of note up there at all. They also searched the entire building, just in case, but there was nothing of note. And so the police told Sam that, look, your first instinct was probably right here, that this was likely a prank. Whoever was maybe messing with your kitchen food, and the cook very likely did this too, I don't know. But, if anything serious happens, about this case or anything else, don't hesitate to reach out, but this does not seem like a big deal. And so the police left, and Sam is just left in his office thinking what do I do here? I mean, like, he didn't know who was messing with the stuff in the kitchen or the cook. He didn't know who had written this note. But it really started to seem like, somebody was up to something, or multiple people were. And he just wanted to understand why. Like, why is this happening? All right, guys, I just did something that I have literally never done before. Not on this YouTube channel, not on any of my podcasts, nowhere. Like, this is a brand new thing, new concept, okay? Now, normally when I, tell stories, it's just me alone talking to a camera or, on stage, but it's just me talking to you. That's the style. That's the MrBallen style, has been for years. But today, it's all gonna change because I interviewed a guest. That's right, we have a new concept called Storytime with MrBallen, where I sat down with the one and only Tom Segura, one of the hottest comedians in the world right now. He's got Netflix specials and shows, mega famous, super cool guy, and an amazing storyteller in his own right. And I talked to him not only about storytelling, but we swapped some stories. I actually told a story that's never been told before on any of our channels. It's really good. And it's just a fun new way of making content. So I think you're gonna love it. It's available right now. It's called Storytime with MrBallen. Let me know what you think. And if you guys enjoy it, I will interview more people and tell more stories like that. The video is live right now. Just click on the link in the description below and have a listen. Let us know what you think and tell us in the comments, because if people like this format, we'll keep doing it, okay? Thank you very much. And now back to the story. Over the next couple of weeks, food continued to go missing from the kitchen, despite locks being changed several more times. The church's cook continued to have his stuff messed with, and more notes, handwritten notes on various pieces of paper and paper towels, began popping up, not just on Sam's desk, but also on other church officials' desks. And these other church officials, when they got them, they were totally convinced that this had to be a prank. But for Sam, he just felt like, I don't know if this is a prank. It's not really funny. It isn't like the person doing it is really getting any big reaction. It's just kind of creepy and unsettling that somebody is, launching this bizarre campaign against the church. It didn't add up. But, even though this is all happening for weeks at this point, the final straw, at least in Sam's mind, happened the previous Sunday when he and his family were at church, and his son was sitting in one of the front pews, and he grabbed a Bible and he opened it up, and sure enough, a note tumbled out of the Bible. It was one of those handwritten notes on a paper towel, and again, it referenced the murder of Leslie Gaddis. And Sam's looking at his young child, his young boy, reading this note, being like, what's going on here? And Sam's like, this is totally unacceptable. It's one thing to be leaving these notes for adults to find, but now children are gonna be reading these notes? That's not okay. And so on March 17th, so roughly about a month and a half after all this strange stuff had begun happening in the church, Sam went to the maintenance crew of the church building and told them he wanted to set up a stakeout. Because by this point, Sam was starting to think I don't know if just, some kid or kids from the elementary school are pranking the church. I mean, this has been going on for weeks now. It's sort of dark at this point with these notes that are being left all over the place. This doesn't really feel like just some kid. This actually feels like maybe an adult, maybe an outsider who's coming in to do this. For what reason, Sam didn't know, but he just felt like something's off here. And so his plan was basically he and the maintenance crew would stay in the church at night and literally hide and try to catch whoever this was, breaking in, doing this stuff in the act. By about 10 p.m. on March 17th, it was just Sam and the maintenance crew in their various hiding spots in the church, sort of centrally located so they could see the hallway that led to the kitchen, that led to Sam's office. They're all just kind of positioned, waiting. And so far, nothing had happened. I mean, the church was totally quiet. Everybody else had left for the night. It was just Sam and the maintenance crew. And they were just kind of twiddling their thumbs, waiting to see what would happen. And at some point, the maintenance crew, they got really bored because there really was nothing happening. I mean, Sam was super motivated, but the maintenance crew's like, I don't know, I don't really care about any of this stuff. And so one of them decided to just, stretch his legs and just walk around the church, just to do anything other than sit here with nothing happening. And so he got up and he walked down the hallway and he's kind of looking in each room and there's nothing going on. And as he was walking towards the nursery at the end of the hallway, he heard some movement coming from behind him. He turned around and he thought it was, one of the other maintenance workers or Sam, but no, he saw a light come on in the kitchen. And so thinking, oh my goodness, maybe I've caught this person in the act, he charges down the hallway, he goes into the kitchen, and he can't believe what he sees. It would turn out everybody had it wrong about what happened to 15-year-old Leslie Gaddis. She really was, several months earlier, literally taken from her bedroom in the middle of the night, taken out of her house. But she wasn't murdered. Everybody thought she had been, and the news acted like she had been, but she hadn't been. Instead, her kidnapper, 42-year-old Ernest Stubblefield, had taken her in the middle of the night and brought her to this church and had been holding her in the church's attic for the last 119 days. And during that time, Ernest had her at knife point and basically watched her near 24/7 to make sure she wouldn't escape. And the whole time he's telling her, don't worry, I'm gonna get ransom for you, and as soon as I do, you'll be allowed to leave. But Leslie began to realize that ransom was not materializing, and it didn't really seem like Ernest had much of a plan, and eventually he would just have to get rid of her. And so she knew, like, if she didn't save herself, she was likely gonna get killed. And so in the rare moments where Leslie was not being watched by Ernest, like for example, when they were down in the kitchen and getting food after hours, they critically had been listening the whole time, and they would hear when the locks had been changed on the fridge, and they would see where the keys were being hid, and they would just sneak down, get the keys, open the fridge up, and they would eat. Well, when they were doing that, Leslie made a point of not just taking a little food for she and Ernest, but she would take a ton of food, like way more than two people would need, and she would tell Ernest, oh, it's just because, it's more for us. But really what she was doing was trying her best to signal to the people in the church that something weird's going on here, huge portions of food are going missing. And then also she would, move around the cook's stuff, his shoes and his apron. And then in the very rare moments where she truly wasn't being watched, she would run off, grab a paper towel and scrawl things like, my name is Leslie, I'm in the attic, and leave them on people's desks, hoping that that would finally get somebody's attention. But unfortunately, pretty much everybody in the church thought it was a joke, except for Sam. However, when he contacted the police and told them, like, hey, I got this note that sort of suggests that maybe Leslie is being held in the attic, well, they went up there and they searched the attic, and they didn't find her because Ernest had found a special crawl space in the attic that nobody knew about. And so she was just feet away from police, but they didn't know she was up there. But luckily, Sam did not stop. He continued to question what was happening, continued to think all this stuff was super weird. And so eventually he has this stakeout. And that maintenance worker, after being so bored, was doing his loop, saw the light come on in the kitchen, goes in the kitchen, and what does he see? But Leslie Gaddis, alive in the flesh, standing right there. She saw him, Ernest is right behind her, and she just made a run for it and literally dove into the maintenance worker's hands, just praying that he would not run away because Ernest was sure to grab her and do something to her. But the maintenance worker, he grabbed Leslie, Ernest took off running, and he would eventually be caught. Ernest was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 20 years in prison. As for Leslie, she was hailed as a hero for saving herself, and she would go on to become a successful lawyer who would serve on the board of the Commission on Missing and Exploited Children. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.
So it wouldn't be a MrBallen episode if I didn't tell you a story.
Yes.
This story isn't really on the internet. You have to write them a letter to get access to this story.
You set up like a Bond story. I had to request access through headquarters to hear a story. I don't know where this is gonna go,
It's good,
but I'm in, dude.
Those stories become fully realized in Bad Thoughts, but it seems like you at least had some concepts early on.
Oh, some of them have been sitting with me for a while. In part 2, where he's like, we need to sit on that toilet together. The reason that even exists is I've always loved upsetting my mother, right? And I know there's things that she doesn't want to ever talk about, right?
It's so good. He wakes up in the cockpit, has no idea how long he's been asleep for. Could have been a second, could have been days, but he's immediately shocked that, holy cow, I did not crash the plane.
That's a great story.
All right, today is a very special episode. I'm actually trying out a brand new format, but don't worry, it is not in replace of core MrBallen content. This is in addition to. So we're calling it Storytime with MrBallen, and I'm gonna be interviewing a guest. I've never done that before on any of my shows. This is the first of its kind. and it's going to be really good. We're going to look at the art of storytelling, how my guest employs storytelling. We're going to tell some stories because, of course, it wouldn't be a MrBallen production if there wasn't actual storytelling. And in fact, I'm going to be telling a story that I've never shared anywhere. It's a really good story, so that's going to happen today too. And our guest is incredible. He's got movies coming out. He's doing stand-up specials left and right. He also happens to be a fan of The Strange, Dark, and Mysterious. And I'm really excited to talk to him about the art of storytelling, swapping some stories, and just seeing what he's all about. So, without further ado, let's get into today's stories.
This is Storytime with MrBallen. I'm Tom Segura.
Tom, welcome to Storytime with MrBallen.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show. And for those who somehow don't know who Tom Segura is, you are arguably one of the hottest comedians, both physically and career-wise in the game.
Yep.
You are acting, producing, directing. You are seriously everywhere right now. And one of the things that I noticed about your sort of performance across mediums is that you really are like a remarkably good storyteller.
Oh, thanks, man.
You really have like nailed the art of storytelling, even though oftentimes when you tell stories, it seems sort of effortless.
Yeah.
But I mean, were you ever sort of intentional about like threading being a storyteller into your work?
I love storytelling. I've always loved storytelling. I've always been like very hyper observant of good storytellers.
Yeah.
My mom is like an amazing natural storyteller. Like she has all the gifts that you need for great storytelling. And my dad was as bad as you can get at telling a story. Like the single worst storyteller. A toddler tells better stories. And so like I think it actually helped to be like, oh shit, that's really good. And like, God, that was so bad. He would be like, I was in the store and then the guy punched the guy, so cops are there. And you're like, wait, where? What happened? And like her version of that story would be like, there was 100 people in line, which you know is an exaggeration, but like that's part of storytelling, right? Where to punch something up.
Sure.
And she's like, and it was hot. And this man walked in and he looked dirty, his head was hanging. So she's like painting a picture and you're like, yeah. And then the other guy, he said, move. And you're talking to my dad, you're like, what about you? Yeah, oh yeah, that guy. And you're like, that's the main guy of the story.
You missed it.
You don't have anything, oh yeah, and then all right, he's dirty. It's like just none of it, like none of the information, leaving out all the key information. Whereas she was like a naturally dramatic storyteller, heightening parts of the story, drawing you in, telling, like adding color, right? And then like knowing when to pull the pin on the whole, like just like natural. What you realize is like when you're a beginning as a comic, telling stories is actually, it's kind of advanced to get people to come along on a story. You don't see like year one, year two comics like, oh, he's a great storyteller. It's short form. It's like, because you can't manufacture being a comfortable comic. It happens because you've done it thousands of times. Yeah. And you have to have a level of comfortability to be like, I'm gonna tell you stories.
So do you have like either a favorite or a go-to story that you would use on stage? It's a joke, but like a story that you love to tell.
Probably the lost wallet story, because that's a true story. Yeah. It's about a guy named Justin, right? A guy who lost his wallet in a cab. And the story is that I'm sharing the cab with a woman and she finds the wallet in between us, asks if it's mine. I say it's not, and she's gonna give it to the driver, and I go, no, give it to me. I'll give it back to its rightful owner. And all this happened. I mean, this was in Adams Morgan in DC. Yeah. And then I took it upon myself that I'm gonna return this wallet to its owner, like this righteous kind of feel good, do the right thing path that I'm gonna, and I announced it, so now I feel even more obligated. And I went through I put a lot of time into getting this wallet back to this guy.
Yeah.
I do call a bunch of places. I use all the information I can find in it. The only person I get a hold of is this guy's father, Justin's dad. And when I tell him I have the wallet, he's just like, he's not gonna amount to anything. And I'm like, what? And he's like, he's a piece of shit. And I go, okay, can I give you the wallet? And he hung up the phone. And so that was like this kind of crazy, closure to this of like the guys being like, my son sucks. And then a long while later, I still remember it quite vividly. I'm at a lunch place on M Street in Georgetown, and I'm with my cousin, and we sat down and we're just looking over the menu, catching up, and the waiter walks up, and I go, Justin? He's like, how do you know my name? And I go, dude, I have your wallet. And he's like, do you have it on you? I go, I don't walk around with your fucking wallet. No, I have my wallet, but I actually have your wallet. And he was like, oh, cool. You want something to drink? And I'm like, that's all you're gonna say about this, dude? Like I found your wallet in a cab in Washington, D.C. Like, it makes me crazy when somebody's reaction to something is like it. And so I ended up telling him to come meet me.
Yeah.
And he came to the door, and I was like, expecting like, now we're gonna connect. I gave him the wallet, and he was like, cool, thanks. And then he turned around and walked away, and I was like, your dad's right, like, you're a piece of shit. And I shut the door.
It's funny, like, so even just now, like, the way you tell a story is you understand that there are aspects of the story that I need to appreciate the context.
Yes.
So that the story matters. And so, like that, you turned it into like
context is like the biggest thing of joke telling too. Sometimes like I watch comedians that you go like, man, that's really funny. Why isn't that working? Like, why doesn't it work? Because it's not that it's not funny. And then you go like, oh, you need to convey more information at the top, at the setup for that observation and joke to work. Like they don't understand what the joke is about yet. The only reason you don't know what the joke is about is because you haven't set it up clearly. Like, you need context for it to be funny.
I gotta ask you, dude, like, how are you able to do all of these things? I mean, right now you're doing stand-up specials on Netflix, like you have 1,000 of those. You have your amazing new show, Bad Thoughts. It's this incredible sketch comedy show on Netflix. And the way I would describe it is like, it starts one way, each of these sketches, and it's beautiful cinematography. And you have a sense of where it's gonna go, right? And then it just takes the most ridiculous detour into just crazy territory. And it reminds me of, there's this story by Edgar Allan Poe called The Imp of the Perverse. And I'm not gonna get into it, but the gist of the story is like, he writes about this guy who, he commits murder. It's a fictional story. It's this guy, he commits murder and he gets away with it. And he can't believe he's gotten away with murder. And so he becomes obsessed with this idea that like he got away with it, to the point where he's like, I gotta tell someone I got away with murder. And he begins talking about it, and he eventually gets himself caught and he gets executed. And it's like this notion from that story that we all have these like thoughts that are self-destructive. That like you're standing on the edge of a building and your fear is not that you'll fall, it's that you might jump. And I feel like your show, Bad Thoughts, it sort of encapsulates like the worst intrusive bad thought that somebody in that scene could act on, and they do. And it just takes it to this extreme level. Like, how are you coming up with these stories?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. I do appreciate it. I've always felt this thing, and I think it's part of the release that you feel in comedy, right? When you go to a lot of times you go to a show, and the big thing is people go, well, what is it about? It's like, well, he says the thing that we all want to say. Right? Like the comedian does in some way. And that's like such a release for an audience that like, they're saying it. They're saying the thought
it's like
that
so
I have.
relatable.
And I've always felt like that thing that I feel that human beings, we all have dark thoughts.
Bad thoughts.
Right? And part of it is like, well, on an individual basis, part of it's societal norms where you have your thought, but you don't act on it, right? I mean, and then you just try to like process it. And then, social media, I think, is this great example of like, oh, these are things that nobody will say to your face, right? But it's like this permission to like, and it's probably, it's a release for people to be able to be like, I fucking hate you. You're like, cool. It's really cool. Because they'll never say it to you, right?
Yeah.
And so in coming up with these stories, it's like, you know, the coffee shop one was the first thing we shot a few years back. I actually filmed a few of the stories a few years. That's how I got the show. And so coffee shop one was one of the original ones we filmed before we had a series.
Oh, nice.
And so, but that is like an example of, it's like everyone has had a bad retail experience, right? Where you're like, I just want to fucking kill this person. And then it was like, well, why don't we just make that? Like, why don't we have the person deserve, backlash in some way and just take it over the top? So we just like went to an extreme place on it. And it's the one that got by far, I think, the biggest reaction where people were like, writing things to me like, yo, they deserved it. And like, you're like, cool, yeah, they did. They deserve to die for the bad coffee order. But yeah, that's a fun, kind of way to exercise the thoughts, is like, what if we think of the thing we've always wanted to say or do, or the impulse in that moment, and actually make it. Yeah.
So actually, I saw in one of your earliest stand-up specials, it was Completely Normal, that some of these ideas that popped up in Bad Thoughts, like the Steven Seagal bit, and the barista one, the two-headed girl, it's like those stories become fully realized in Bad Thoughts, but it seems like you at least had some concepts early on.
Oh, some of them have been sitting with me for a while. Yeah. Or even like the origin, the nugget of the thing that became something else. Like there's the whole reason the storyline of the virtual reality guy.
It's so good. That's the second episode, right?
Because it's a 3-part story, right?
It's so good.
So there's the office, where he gets like disrespected. Then he creates the video game. Then you reveal that it's a game, and then there's the part 3 where it's like he's become this successful guy. Well, in part 2, where he's like, we need to sit on that toilet together, the origin, like the whole reason, like what makes me laugh is that the origin of that, the reason that even exists is, I've always loved upsetting my mother, right? And I know there's things that she doesn't want to ever talk about. And one of them is going to the bathroom, right? She just doesn't want to. So I try to say it as much as possible.
That's good.
And several years ago, I would do father-son trips with my dad, like where I was a working adult, but I was like, he was like, let's plan something. We'd go spend like 2-3 days in Portland, Maine or something, and then I'd go back to LA. But we've been doing those trips for years. And like, even 25, 30 years ago, when I was a teenager or whatever, I would go on a trip like with my dad. I get back and my mom was like, how was the weekend? And I would go, well, it was great. And I go, this one day, I go, Dad was taking a shit. And she would go, I don't want to hear this. And I go, no, this is,
please.
This is actually, she goes, I don't want to hear this. I go, it's not what you think. She's like, okay, what? And I would go, so Dad was taking a shit. And she'd be like, what? Okay. And I go, you know how when you sit on a toilet, there's like a gap between your legs? And she'd go, yeah. I go, so I had to go. And so I sat in that gap and we went at the same time. And she'd be like, what the hell is wrong with you? And so I would do that to her like every couple of years. I would tell her the same thing. She would never remember that I'd already told her that.
Oh, you've used this joke.
I would use that exact thing, that we went to the bathroom at this, and she was like, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. And I basically wrote a story where I was like, how can I incorporate going to the bathroom, and that's where we created the portal world. But it's all based on that.
Do you have any concepts, material that you do come back to, that you think about that could work, but you haven't employed it in a public way yet?
There is this thing where sometimes you go, I've tried things and abandoned them, and then you find that like 5 or 10 years later, you go, oh, there was that joke. And you're like, I'm gonna try it. 10 years have gone by. So I'm naturally gonna have some difference in my approach to saying it or telling it. And it's one of those things where sometimes you go like, holy shit, that works now. Like it
Yeah.
needed to marinate for a decade. But it is, I think you learn to listen, you listen to yourself, right? It's kind of like your guiding voice internally, right? Of like, it's equivalent to like, don't walk down that hallway, you know? Like, I think the thing you have to work on if you're doing this is learning how to listen to that, listen to yourself. Like, hey man, don't ignore those thoughts. Like I used to think that laziness meant not getting up on stage, but what I learned is that laziness in comedy, like in stand-up, is about all the times you're not on stage. You can get on stage every night and still be a lazy comic. You know, you're lazy if you don't spend some time kind of exploring your own thoughts, jotting down that thing, thinking about it, like that's the work. You know, the work is in all that time before you get on stage. And so it kind of surprises you. Someone could be like, you're not lazy. You're doing spots all the time. You're like, no, you're still lazy because you're not doing anything off stage. I mean, one thing that's very clear is you see comedians who are stuck, you know, like they're like, I feel stuck here, I'm not evolving. I would bet almost everything that a lot of the people saying that are the ones who are not trying things, it's like not doing, you always need like something new. New is what makes it exciting and moving. And so it's very easy to fall into that, like you figure out 20 minutes that work or whatever.
Yep.
And you go, I'm just gonna do that because it works. Because you get fear of like, what if I leave that and I try to come up with new stuff and the new stuff doesn't hit like that. But then the worst thing happens, which is that 20 minutes that works just starts to weigh on you because it's not exciting or new in any way. And then you slowly kind of die inside. That's why you kind of always want to turn things over. Like I feel like you shoot something or you record a special and then you just go, I'm done with it and I need to come up with more. And then your brain just kind of, you know, you generate more because of the necessity.
The idea of like working on material, like going up on stage to a live audience.
Yeah.
And not even telling them you're doing this, but like trying a new minute or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that something that you do? I mean,
oh yeah, that's the part you get addicted to.
Really?
That's the whole drive of doing stand-up. It's thinking of something and going, I'm gonna try this on stage, and then the build of anxiety of will this work or won't this work? The euphoria that you feel when it does work is like unlike any other feeling, and which is why I think comedians will do it into their 90s if they live. And then the absolute gutting depression you feel when it doesn't is like it's so powerful that you realize the only way to overcome that feeling is to try something again and hopefully get the other reaction.
Wow. So I can only speak to my limited, I not stand-up comedy, but I've done stand-up storytelling. If you
spoke in front of an audience. I mean, yeah.
But so in my world, I already know the conclusion of all the stories. I know exactly where it's gonna go. I remember I had one show that I did and the audience was literally like so respectful. It was difficult for me to like get into the story because they're like so proper, so nice, so quiet. The other crowds were like really reacting to stuff. And it made it so difficult to do the same stories I had rehearsed. I can't imagine having the blow of them being like, dude, what was that? And then getting up and doing it again.
Oh yeah, and the thing is there are audiences, even sometimes in stand-up shows, like you don't expect it, but it's not like every crowd's the same. Sometimes you get these very reserved crowds.
Yeah.
Where you're like used to people with like a lot of energy and they're just like clapping at the end, the bit, and you're like, Jesus. The thing you learn over time is when an audience isn't like super high energy, or you go like, this audience sucks, essentially.
Yeah.
You don't go, hey, like when you're starting out, you're like, why do you guys suck? Because you don't realize that sometimes, and this is true, that audience that was just like, they weren't high energy, they had a great time. Like you don't realize it until you've done this a while, that like you'll finish that show and you go, what the fuck was that? And then you run into people and they're like, that I had the best time at that. And you're like,
wow,
really? Because what happens is an audience, for the most part, they're not referencing this show to thousands of other shows. You are. Like, you know that they're down here on the list of audiences. They don't know that.
That's true.
They're just like this might be the first show they've gone to in like 3 years, and they're like, this was a great time. And
wow.
And they'll become aware if you tell them. So you're like, just so you know, you suck. And they're like, I thought we were having a good time. They just don't have that like level of energy. Now, the next night you could be in a venue where it is just like fireworks.
Yeah.
And those ones you almost want to tell them, like, you guys are unbelievable. like they don't, I don't know if you know this, but you're insanely good. Yeah.
I know that you are a consumer of the strange, dark, and mysterious.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be a MrBallen episode if I didn't tell you a story.
Yes.
And so we actually looked for a story that would specifically resonate with you.
And I'm so excited right
and
now.
we even, the way we got the story, this is the context part. This story isn't really on the internet. Like, we heard references to it and we tried to find the source material for it, but we couldn't. Like, we literally looked, we couldn't find it. It's a story out of Mexico. And so we finally had our Spanish language researcher track down this library in Mexico that had a copy of this story. There was a very unique recording and transcript, and it's being stored like locally at this library in Mexico. And so the way to access this story is you can't just like contact the library. You have to write them a letter to get access to this story.
To hear a story?
To just read the transcript.
To read a transcript.
That is in the story. It's the story without the transcript, not really a good story. You need the transcript, you'll see. So we followed their steps, we contact the library, and we get access to the story, and they're like very weary of what we're gonna do with it, but they're like, okay, be careful with this one, right? Because it's like a sensitive story for Mexico.
Okay.
So that's the setup. So
this is, by the way, let's just stop. Great setup.
Great setup.
I mean, I don't know where this is gonna go.
It's good,
but
man.
I'm fucking in, dude. I mean, you set up like a Bond story.
It's pretty good.
I had to like request access through fucking headquarters to hear a story. Okay.
So in June of 1976, there's this 23-year-old kid named Rafael Perez, and he's training to be a pilot. And he flies his training missions, if you will. He's a civilian. So he flies his training flights out of this airport in Chimalacán, Mexico. It's about 3 hours inland from Acapulco. And this kid, he's flown many times, but always with another pilot. So he's learning how to fly a small plane, like a Cessna. And on this day in June, he's gonna fly on his own for the first time. The flight profile was very simple. You're gonna take off like you always have, fly in a loop, come back and land. Nothing more to it. You're basically demonstrating you can do it without panicking on your own.
Yeah.
Right? And keep in mind, in 1976, the controls, the instruments inside of the aircrafts were pretty rudimentary. Like they didn't have GPS systems. It was sort of like you had like your compass and you had your altimeter, but honestly, a lot of flying was literally dead reckoning, like looking out the window and just seeing where you were, right? So he takes off at 9:15 a.m. It's June 23rd of 1976. He takes off. And right away, he notices that it's very foggy, and this was something he knew on the ground, but from a dead reckoning perspective, looking out the window, he's got limited access to reference points on the ground. So he really has not really a good sense of where he is. He's using his instruments and he's sort of guessing when he's supposed to make this turn, to bank around, to come in and land. But on his approach back to the airport, he's successfully done this flight. He can't quite find the airport, like he's struggling to see it. But at a certain point, based on his instruments, he realizes he's off course, he's lost. And so he tries calling in with a radio back to the control tower to be like, I'm lost, like I'm letting you know, it's gonna take me a minute. He doesn't really hear back from them, it's sort of garbled static. And then he realizes, oh, I need to fly back left. I need to go left. So he takes the yoke, the steering wheel, and he tries to bank the airplane left. But the airplane doesn't go left. It just continues flying level at 7,000 feet in a straight line. And he's thinking, okay, there's clearly some sort of issue here. It's okay. He's not panicking. He hops on the radio and he says, hey, I'm having some issues. I can't go left. He tried going right. Nothing's affecting the plane. It's flying straight at 7,000 feet. He hops on the radio, he starts talking like, what do I do here? I can't do anything to my plane. And as he's trying to get a hold of anybody who's not getting back in touch with him, but we have his voice being recorded into this radio, the plane actually begins to climb. And he's not pulling back on the yoke, he's not making the plane climb. The plane is climbing on its own. And so it begins to climb, and the way the fog and mist was, is there was like this big, like huge cloud that he was basically flying into. So he's ascending up to like 8, 9, 10,000 feet. He can't go left, can't go right. He's just going straight up into this cloud. And so he can't see anything. He's like in a void. He's totally panicked now. He can't get a hold of anybody on the radio. About the time he's totally obscured in the clouds, he feels this overwhelming tiredness come over him. And he passes out, just passes out in the cockpit. He wakes up in the cockpit, has no idea how long he's been asleep for. Could have been a second, could have been days, but he's immediately shocked that, holy cow, I did not crash the plane. Like, I know I just fell asleep in the plane. But a couple things immediately become clear to him. First of all, his plane's still flying. He's still in the air, he's still coasting along, right? But he's back down to 7,000 feet. He was climbing before, now he's back down to 7,000 feet. He also looks out the window and there's no more mist or fog or anything like that. It's actually just the open ocean underneath him. And immediately he thinks to himself, I took off from this airport that's 3 hours inland from the coast. If I went in a straight line, and he looks at his clock and it says 11:30. Took off at 9:15, 10:15, 11:15. So 2 hours and 15 minutes from the time he took off. I'm doing the math right. It's below 3 hours. What body of water am I over? The amount of time that has transpired that apparently I was asleep for is not enough time for me to arrive over any body of water. That flashes through his mind. In addition to that, he looks at his gas gauge and it's at 3/4 tank. And he knew that not only is that way too high, but he wouldn't have had, even if he had 3 hours, he wouldn't have had enough gas to reach any water body. So wouldn't have had enough gas, but have 3/4 tank of gas. Also, again, how did I get here? I have no idea how I got here. Has no idea where he is. And as he's like coming to like, what's happening here? Somebody chimes in over the radio and goes, hey, are you there? And he grabs this radio and he's totally frantic. He's like, hey, I fell asleep in my plane. I don't know where I am. And there's a pause, and this is all recorded. There's a pause, and the guy on the other end, he introduces himself sort of cautiously. He's like, hey, this is Carlos. Are you alone in your airplane? And Raphael is like, of course I'm alone. Like, where am I? What? I think I fell asleep. I don't know what's going on. And Carlos, his reaction is just sort of, okay, well, listen, here's what we're gonna do. You're just off the coast of Acapulco, and for the last hour, you've been flying out over the water. You just kind of showed up, right? And by the way, going back to the timeline, he arrived off the coast of Acapulco now an hour earlier. That was 10:30 in the morning, took off at 9:15. Takes 3 hours to get there. He apparently did it in about an hour and 15 minutes. So he's circling over the water, and Carlos is like, hey, just come into the airport where I am. I'm gonna get you in there, you're gonna land, and we'll talk to you then. And so Raphael is just happy to be alive at this point. He comes in, he lands at the airport in Acapulco. And as soon as he gets off, there's these people in suits that are there to meet him. And they immediately take him, they detain him, put him in like a black car. He's asking what's going on, nobody knows, or they don't tell him. And they drive him to a hospital. And he's the whole time saying, I'm so sorry about the craft. Please tell like where I flew out of that I'm sorry about the craft. I hope it's not damaged. They bring him to the hospital, they drug test him right away. He's not on drugs, he's sober. And they also have a psychologist come in and they give him a profile, make sure he's sane, and she determines that he is. And so the whole time, Raphael has no idea what's happening. He doesn't know what they're doing. He doesn't understand any of this. And so finally they say, okay, we're gonna tell you what happened. So when you showed up off the coast of Acapulco at about 10:30 in the morning, which no one understands how you got there, it's not possible. You showed up on the radar screen of who you were talking to, Carlos, the air traffic control guy. And he talked to you for an hour while you were out over the water. That whole time you were circling, you were talking to him, and it was recorded. And I'm gonna read to you the first thing that Raphael said to Carlos. And you're gonna see in a minute why Carlos's first question when Raphael came to was, is there somebody else in the plane? He said in a very deep, almost robotic voice, when Carlos saw this blip on his radar at 10:30, he said, hey, who is this? You're flying over Acapulco's coast, what's going on here? The voice came back and said, the pilot is speaking, but not of his own free will. We are using him as a microphone. Your equipment is too primitive. It is not important who we are or where we come from, only that we are inhabitants of the same universe. For the next 30 to 45 minutes, the voice being projected through Raphael talked about humanity is the only intelligent species in the entire universe that uses warfare and conducts violence on each other, and you are poised for a nuclear holocaust, and you may be exterminated if this continues. And then at about 11:30, Raphael wakes up, and his voice changed completely, and he's like, "Oh, what's going on? I think I fell asleep at the wheel." And that's why Carlos is like, "Wait a minute, I've been talking to you for an hour." And he's like, "Is somebody else in the craft with you?" Right? No one has any idea how Raphael wound up over the coast. They examined his plane, nothing wrong with his plane. It really was 3/4 tanks of gas. Didn't make sense how it got there. Nobody knows. Raphael has no idea how he got there. And the Mexican government quickly took this story, buried it, and now you can only access it in this obscure library in Mexico.
That's a great story. That's a great story.
So what's your take on what happened?
First of all, great job telling the story.
Thank you.
I mean, there is only one summary you could get. You know, either this is like I guess it's two. It's either a bipolar schizophrenic who is having a pretty crazy episode, or there's another being involved, which is more exciting, more entertaining, because we're in the era now of the government being like, yeah, we have stuff.
UFOs are real.
Yeah, and we have aliens, and they've been here, and other places have them too. And most people just go, oh, cool. Like the thing that we used to make a movie about as being like, can you imagine if there were aliens? And everybody would go like, that would be fucking wild. And then now we're like, yeah, we have them. And everyone's like, yeah. It's very strange, right? Like that there's like congressional testimony
I know
about aliens. Nobody's heart even skipped a beat. I thought we would all stop and be like, no way. Nobody cares.
I know. Some of the footage that's been released, that some of the videos of these apparent UFOs.
Yeah.
I mean, either it's incredible CGI, which is entirely possible, but I think the idea that there's this like widespread conspiracy by the government to like what dupe us into believing that maybe that these aren't real or something. It doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it doesn't.
Do you believe in aliens? I mean, are extraterrestrials, life outside of humans?
So for me, it was always like when you have, and I don't even have the full comprehension of it, but when you have some grasp of the idea of the size of our galaxies in the universe, it becomes, for me, it just always felt like too arrogant to be like, it's just us.
Yes. I stand with you firmly on that point.
Yeah, and then like, I think the natural thing is that you just become naturally more curious, you know? My wife is a huge, like, dude, it's all day. She's like, you know what this guy just said about UAPs? I'm like, I don't know. And she gives me like she'll read back the transcript from like the senator, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty wild.
That's pretty good.
But honestly, it's made me realize that it is a more exciting thing to like,
of course it is,
think about and talk about. And then, I mean, I think the natural thing is like, it feels like it's almost like being crumbed out for us. You're like, yeah, but where's the next thing, right? Like, when are we gonna see or hear from something? You know, like you just want more.
That point exactly. I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who gave this example. I don't know if it was him, the astrophysicist guy.
Yeah.
He was like, humans think that if there were alien life, extraterrestrial life on Earth, that effectively we believe we could just simply identify it. That we would view it as like a three-dimensional being, let's say.
Right.
But he was like, think of it this way. What are the odds, or I should say, when you walk down the street and there is an ant on the ground, are you like, I want to get down there and talk to that ant?
Right.
No.
No.
You might step on the ant. You might not even notice the ant. Go even lower than that, to like algae.
Yeah.
Are you like looking to communicate with algae? No. What's to say that we are not equivalent to an ant or algae to other beings?
It's a great
suggesting if there were higher beings on this planet, it's very arrogant to say we would simply, one, they'd be interested in us.
Yeah.
Are you interested in algae? Or two, that we could even recognize them as anything close to what we are. Algae and humans couldn't be more different in terms of their makeup.
Yeah.
And so it's like they could absolutely be here, but they're four-dimensional.
Imagine the aliens watching, like they're just like trying to figure out, and they just pull up this clip and they're just like, look at these two fucking ants, like talking about the dumbest shit.
Two
We don't want
ants.
to waste our time with these morons.
Dude.
There's also the theory that it becomes, it feels like fantasy, but I don't know, you can let your mind kind of embrace the idea that certain humans, you're like, that's a reptilian. Like, you know what I mean? Like like these evil, like these like innately evil seeming people. And,
Yeah.
and I don't know, that they're already here. You're like, it's kind of fun to play with that idea.
I like to believe, man.
Yeah,
I do.
it's fun. It's fun.
So for you, I mean, you've been successful in so many different mediums. You just got renewed for season 2 of Bad Thoughts,
Yeah.
which is amazing.
Awesome.
You've sort of done like all of it. What's the next chapter? Like you described evolving. I mean, you've done a lot of that. What's next?
Honestly, I keep doing as many of those things as you can. And then I have a movie this summer I'm really excited to do. I've always loved movies. Like I'm a huge fan of cinema.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, I feel like I won the lottery where I get to do a movie. This is so awesome. I'm so excited to do it.
Can you tell us anything about the movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's a cartel comedy. I get to play more than one character. I get to play 2 characters, which is like, it just feels insane that they're allowing me to do this. And it's really, really funny script. It's so ridiculous, and it's an R-rated comedy.
Yeah.
It's wild. It's fun, but it also has like a lot. To me, like the thing that I loved about great comedies growing up, especially like R-rated comedies, was like you almost take the comedies for granted. The comedic parts of it. It's like you have to have great story supporting the Like it's almost like you go like, I know this is gonna be funny, but is the story a good story?
Yeah.
And I think this is a really good story that has like great dynamics, great characters, and it's outrageously funny, but you still care for this main character. And I'm talking to you about 6 weeks before we shoot.
I hope terrible.
If it, they'll definitely cut this up and play it if we make a piece of shit.
It's gonna be so good.
But I'm very excited to do it, man. I'm so excited. So that's to me like the most exciting thing about like what's next. I'm so stoked to do this. I've always been, I moved to LA when I was 22, thinking that like I'm gonna have a movie career. And I'm 46.
Crushing it, dude.
I'm gonna do a movie, so I'm excited.
Well, dude, congratulations. And seriously, you need to check out Bad Thoughts on Netflix. Season 2 is very exciting. I look forward to your movie. You're the man, dude. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, man. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went there anyway. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the Like Button's house and replace all of their family photos of pictures of you wearing their clothes in the same poses. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. At 6:30 p.m. on May 14, 1955, a 24-year-old man named Donald Giroux stood next to his friend, 28-year-old Murray Anderson, on the shore of a natural spring in the state of Georgia. The spring was called Radium Springs because literally there was radium in the water. Radium is a naturally occurring, highly radioactive metallic element, but there were such low levels of it in the water that it wasn't really a hazard. However, the radium did have an effect on the water. It made it practically neon blue, and so it was totally mesmerizing. I mean, you look at this thing and you know there's something different about this spring. Also, this spring was incredibly deep. So Donald and Murray were both members of the US Navy. And so naturally, they spent a lot of time, in and around water, because that's what the Navy does. They work in and around water. But ironically, it was actually when Donald and Murray were not working that they spent the most amount of time in the water, because in their off time, they were recreational scuba divers. Except back in 1955, recreational scuba diving was totally not safe. And that was because, underwater diving certainly existed at the time. I mean, institutions like the Navy, they were prolific divers. But civilians did not really dive on their own. And so as a result, if you wanted to recreationally scuba dive, well, you didn't really have access to good equipment or even proper equipment. I mean, there just wasn't anything available to you. And so for people like Donald and Murray, who did want to go explore the underwater abyss on their own, they had to literally make their own diving equipment, like their own oxygen tanks and their own flashlights and goggles. I mean, all of it. I mean, it was amateur. It was homemade equipment. And so that's what made it really dangerous. On top of, when you're underwater diving, as I've done myself, a lot of things can go wrong. And so that's also dangerous. And so the whole thing, it's asking for problems. But for Donald and Murray, it was actually the danger associated with recreational diving that made it so appealing. They liked the idea that other people were scared to go underwater, with their DIY equipment. For Donald and Murray, they loved it. They got a thrill out of it. And on top of that, they kind of felt like explorers. They got to go to places underwater where literally nobody else had gone before. In fact, they had already gone to other locations and mapped out, tunnels and underwater cave systems and all these different things that literally nobody else had done before. And they loved it. And today was going to be no different, because there were sections in Radium Springs that nobody had mapped, and they were going to go down there and see it for themselves. So after the two men looked at each other and nodded and just kind of gave the signal it was time to begin the dive, they donned their amateur equipment, their oxygen tanks and their goggles and their flippers, and then they walked into the neon blue water and submerged. A few minutes later, Donald and Murray had traveled about 70 feet straight down the water column. And at this point, the light is really fading. They can't really see too well. They did have flashlights that they had rigged up, that they had waterproofed. But at this point, down 70 feet, it's getting pretty dark. But right in front of them, off to the side, was this huge entrance, this underwater tunnel entrance. And this was actually a well-known cavern. Like, this is actually where other recreational divers would go to if they went to Radium Springs. It was this cavern. But while the entrance to the cavern had been sort of mapped out and searched, there were all these little spidery offshoots once you got into this cavern that had not been explored. And so what Donald and Murray were going to do is go into the cavern and then basically start, splintering off and seeing what else was in there and mapping it out. Now, as much as Donald and Murray did like the sort of risks associated with this activity, they weren't completely reckless. They had attached a dive line when they had gone into the spring that they attached to the surface and they fed down with them. It's a 200-foot line, and they carried it with them. The lead diver would basically unspool as they went. The two divers would be right next to each other, and they'd be holding on to this line. And so when they would go into this cavern, if for some reason they got turned around or, if they got, totally confused, whatever it was, they could always just follow their line back out of the cavern, back up to the surface. This was not like rocket science. This is something that divers today still do. So using a dive line, very common practice, and Donald and Murray were doing just that. And so they went into this cavern, they got their dive line spooling out, and everything is totally fine. But once they were inside of this cavern, all the light completely went away. I mean, the cavern was relatively spacious, but the light is coming straight down, and this tunnel entrance is basically, horizontal. And so once they're inside of this cavern, it's utterly pitch black. But Donald and Murray have dove other underwater cave systems. They knew going in how dark this cave system was going to be. They had their flashlights, that they had jerry-rigged to be waterproof, and they're holding on to their line, and they're going into this cavern looking for their first offshoot. But as they're going into this cavern, there's all this silt, all this mud that's kind of caked to the walls and the floor that began getting kicked up from their flippers and bumping into it. And before long, because of the silt and the lack of light, they could basically only see maybe 6 inches in front of them. Like, even shining their light, all they'd see is all the silt. And so very quickly, the visibility basically fell to 0. But, again, they're going in knowing this is the environment they're going into. They're confident, they're cool, they're moving along. But as the two divers were continuing through the cavern, getting deeper and deeper, and it's starting to get more and more restrictive, the deeper they go, they were about to go into this offshoot when Donald suddenly started seeing all these air bubbles coming up against him. And now he can't quite see where they're coming from, but there's only one place that an air bubble could be emerging from, and that's from his oxygen tank. And so clearly there's some sort of issue. He can't see because it's so dark. He also has homemade equipment, and so the risk of catastrophic failure is pretty high with his equipment. And so he begins trying to figure out where this leak is coming from, checking his equipment, trying to make it stop, but he can't. He can't really communicate to Walter, who's got the spool of dive line, who's continuing straight forward into this offshoot. He can't quite tell him what's going on. They can't actually speak to each other. Again, it's pitch black, there's silt, it's sort of, claustrophobic and stressful. And so ultimately, Donald grabs Murray and just tries to shake him and sort of signal, hey, I got an issue here, but he had no way of knowing if Murray actually understood. But Donald, he knew he just had to get out of there. He had to go back to the surface and fix his issue before it got way worse. And so, even though he knew he was kind of leaving his buddy here, he's thinking, okay, Murray's got the dive line, he's experienced, I just grabbed him, everything's gonna be okay. And Donald turned around, kicked up more silt, and held onto that dive line, but now followed it back out of the cavern and back up to the surface. And when he got to the surface, he took a big breath. He was saved, he checked his equipment and realized, wherever the issue was, and he was actually able to fix the issue. And so before long, after only being on the surface for a couple of minutes, he had put his equipment back on, he was back in the water and following the dive line back down towards the cavern. As Donald began his descent down towards that cavern, 70 feet down, the whole time he's holding onto the dive line, making sure he doesn't lose that. But really what he's focused on is checking his equipment, because as he's going down, he's got basic visibility here. It's not gonna be like in the cavern where you can't see anything. And so as he's going down, he's checking his equipment and just making sure that there isn't a leak. And by the time he got all the way down 70 feet and the dive line turned and went into that cavern, Donald was feeling pretty good that his equipment was good, it was not malfunctioning, and it was safe to go back into the cavern with Murray. And so that's what he does. He's got his flashlight in one hand, he's got the dive line in the other, and he's now looking straight into this dark opening of this cavern, and in Donald goes, the whole time holding onto that dive line. And pretty much immediately, once inside the cavern, the flashlight became useless because again, the silt's still kicked up, there's no current running through this cavern, so the silt is not going anywhere. But either way, Donald knew what he was doing. He was going straight in there to connect with Murray and continue this dive and see what else is in here and, map it out for other divers. And so into the cavern he goes, he's holding the dive line in one hand, he's got his flashlight and he's going deeper and deeper into this cavern. And the whole time he's expecting at any moment, he's just gonna bump into Murray. But he just keeps going and going deeper and deeper into the system. The walls are getting tighter and tighter around him. And eventually he reaches the very end of the dive line, 200 feet at this point, deep into this cavern. And there's no Murray. Murray's gone. Now Donald, he's looking around. Remember, it's total darkness. All he's got is this flashlight, which basically just illuminates the silt that's been kicked up all around him. But where he is at this exact moment, the silt wasn't too bad. It was just like this abyss all around him. It's totally black. There's nothing around him. And in a sudden panic, Donald thinks, oh my goodness, I'm so far into this cavern, I haven't found Murray, like something's happened to him. He's run out of air or he's gotten lost. Like, how could he have let go of the dive line? What's going on here? And so Donald immediately just starts going down to the bottom of the cave and searching the ground, thinking that, maybe Murray got to this point and passed out and sunk to the bottom, but he gets to the bottom of the cave, there's nothing there, he starts feeling the tunnels, there's nothing, and at this point he's kicked up even more silt, and so, he really can't see anything. And he's thinking, it took me a while to get in here, and I'm running low on oxygen right now. I need to get help immediately, because Murray, he's gonna run out of time really quickly here. And so Donald, he turns around and holding onto this dive line, he pulls himself out of the cavern, he goes back to the surface. Some part of him was hoping that when he got up there that he would just magically see Murray waiting for him, but nope, he's all alone, there's nobody here. And at that point, Donald took off his gear and he contacted authorities. Not long after that, 2 commercial divers, along with an entire US Navy dive team, arrived at Radium Springs and began looking for Murray. And they searched and they searched and they couldn't find him until 8 a.m. the next morning, 12 hours after Donald had surfaced. It would turn out, when Donald had that malfunction that caused him to leave the cavern and leave Murray behind and go to the surface and fix himself and then go back down again, well, in that space of time that he was away from Murray, Murray continued to spool out the dive line, maybe not necessarily knowing that Donald had left him at this point, and Murray got all the way to the end of the dive line, 200 feet, and at that point, in this uncharted tunnel he was in, somehow or another, Murray became disconnected from the dive line. Maybe he let go of it, maybe he bumped into something, we don't know, but either way, he let go of the dive line, basically right at the end of the dive line. And when Donald came back down and got to the end of that dive line and discovered Murray wasn't there, well, what he didn't know is that Murray actually was just a couple of feet away. He was basically right above him, because that's where Murray was ultimately found. He had drowned literally feet away from the dive line, but Donald, he couldn't see him, and in a total panic state, in an effort to find Murray, Donald began fumbling around, going down and rubbing up against the bottom and the walls, kicking up all this silt. And you gotta figure at this exact moment, Murray, who's very much alive at this point, almost certainly, is right above him, and now his visibility, which was already terrible, he's probably scared to death because he's looking for this dive line, and now the silt is just getting kicked up all around him. He probably knows Donald's nearby. He's swimming around looking for Donald. Donald's looking for Murray. They swim right past each other. It's absolute madness. But then eventually Donald just vanishes because he's going to find help. And Murray is left all by himself in total darkness, disoriented, terrified, has no idea where the dive line is. Silt is making it impossible to know what direction he's even going. And so in Murray's final moments, he just scrambled around trying to find his way out again until he eventually drowned, again, just feet away from his dive line, the very thing that would have brought him to safety. Hey guys, did you know you can get your strange, dark, and mysterious fix anytime, anywhere with the MrBallen podcast on Amazon Music? Well, you can. There are tons of stories waiting to be binged right now, plus there are exclusive stories on there that have never been shared on this YouTube channel. Amazon Music listeners get to listen to new episodes an entire month before everybody else. You can also listen to my other show, MrBallen's Medical Mysteries, 2 weeks early and totally ad-free on Amazon Music. If you're already a Prime member, well, you already have access to those 2 shows, plus hundreds of other top podcasts ad-free, all at no extra cost. That's right, your Prime membership includes Amazon Music absolutely free. So if you're ready to dive deeper into strange, dark, and mysterious stories, well, go download the Amazon Music app today and listen to the MrBallen podcast and also MrBallen's Medical Mysteries. Now, back to today's stories. On May 28, 2022, a photographer named April Vertucci, along with 2 of her friends, snuck towards this abandoned funeral home in Flint, Michigan. The funeral home was a big brick building right off a main road in the center of the city, and April and her 2 friends knew there were lots of people that were kind of looking in this direction, and it was illegal to go into this property, and so very carefully they snuck their way towards the back door of the building. And they saw the door was, completely attached to its hinges. It was in good shape, appeared to be locked, but they thought, what the heck? They walked up to the door, took a look around. April reached down, tried the handle, and it pulled right open. And as soon as this happened, April was psyched, because not only was she a photographer, but she was also an urban explorer, which meant she would sneak into places like this, abandoned buildings and other man-made sites, just to have a look around. One, because it was fun and exciting, but also because she got to use her photography, taking cool pictures of places like this funeral home. And so April's friends were also into urban exploring, and as soon as this door came open, it was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe we're gonna get to explore this legendary site. So this funeral home had been shut down about 5 years earlier because of reports of unsanitary conditions inside. Anonymous reporters had gone in and discovered that there were literally like human remains out. There were up to 40 bodies being stored in one room with no air conditioning, so they're just rotting. There's maggots all over the place. There's embalming liquids on the ground. There's blood everywhere. I mean, basically, this place was like the site of a horror movie. And so the state comes in, they shut this place down, and the owner, after being shut down, just abandons the building, just leaves it exactly the way they had left it. I mean, the bodies were removed by the state, but all the equipment for the funeral home was just left behind. Everything was sealed up, and that was that. And the place was deemed off limits. But naturally, urban explorers found out about this and began going in to see this horror show for themselves. And so April and her friends, they had heard about this place and immediately were like, we gotta go in there, we gotta see it for ourselves. And so they hopped in a car and they drove over 3 hours from Ohio to Michigan just to check this place out. And now here they were, door open, and in they go. Once the door shut behind them, April and her two friends were looking down this long, dark hallway. It's totally silent inside. The walls were made out of cinder block that had been painted white, but the paint was all chipping off and they had their flashlights out and it's dark and creepy and they're looking down the hallway. And just for a second, they just stop and listen to see if anybody else is inside of here moving around. You know, maybe other urban explorers or even other animals or anything, squatters, they don't know. But they're sitting there for a second just listening and they don't hear anything. And so with April in front, they begin walking down this hallway. And as they're walking, there's all this trash on the ground. It's totally eerie as they're walking. You know, every little sound is sort of startling them. They're kind of laughing as they're going. And eventually, April stops in front of this first door that she sees, the first door off the hallway, and it's closed. And right across the center of this door is this big caution sign saying, you know, stay back. And then underneath the caution sign, it says formaldehyde. And so April and her friends knew that, okay, well, formaldehyde is a chemical used to embalm bodies, something funeral homes did. And so they know that behind this door very likely was the embalming room, where funeral homes would literally pump dead bodies full of formaldehyde and prep the bodies, you know, to be presented at the wake, you know, before they're actually laid to rest. You know, it's like this is where actual dead bodies are manipulated. And so April and her friends are pretty excited. And so April's, you know, she opens up the door and they look inside of this room and it's very eerie. It's pretty much vacant. But in the center of this room, it's all dark. They have their flashlights, right? In the center of the room is this metal table, this standalone metal table. It's like a gurney. And it's where the dead body would be placed as they're being embalmed. And then on the walls all around are all these shelves with various tools and, you know, vials of various milky liquids. There's a saw, there's scissors, there's scalpels. On the ground, there's, you know, fabric that appears to have some sort of bodily fluids on it. I mean, this really looks like the scene of a horror movie. But for April and her friends, it's like, this is a gold mine. I mean, this is what we came here for. And so April and her friends, for the next little bit, they just began walking all around the embalming room. You know, April taking photos and her friends and April kind of moving things around, seeing what was in there. And then eventually, you know, they left and they continued to search the building and they found a chapel where there were caskets laying around. They also went into a garage and they found there was an old hearse just left inside the garage. I mean, the place really was as creepy as everybody said it was. And so it was sometime around discovering the garage that the girls had gone back to the main hallway and they discovered this other door that they hadn't seen when they were searching over the first 30 minutes they had been in there. And this door led to this ominous stairwell that went down into what appeared to be the basement. And so at this point, you know, the girls felt like they had sort of searched the entire main floor and, you know, the two friends, not April, they really wanted to go down these steps and explore the basement. You know, they'd been here long enough that it seemed pretty clear that they were the only ones there. It had been totally quiet. And even though it was creepy, I mean, ultimately they sort of felt safe at this point. And April did too, but she also was having a great time still taking pictures on the first floor. And so at this point, the group decided to split up. The two friends would go down into the basement, and April, for a little bit longer, would stay up on the first floor and just continue taking photos, and then she would join them. And so, no big deal, they split up, the girls go down to the basement, April's taking her photos, doing her thing, and just a couple of minutes later, April hears her friends in the basement, through the floors, yelling out something to the effect of, "Oh my gosh, is that real?" And then the other friend is like, "Yes, that is real, oh my gosh." And so April, she runs to that doorway, she goes down the stairs, and she finds her friends at the foot of the stairs. And they're looking out into the main space of the basement that April can't quite see yet. And so she goes right down to her friends, she's looking at them, they look horrified, they're looking out at something obviously terrible in the basement. And April turns from her friends to the basement, and what she sees makes no sense. There's just like this empty basement, with some stuff pushed up against the walls, but in the middle of the basement is what appears to be like this standalone metal jail cell. Like imagine metal rungs that you would imagine in a jail, but all the way around. It's about 8 feet tall, 10 feet wide, 4 feet deep. It's just this inexplicable standalone jail cell. At least that's the way April interpreted it, and so did her friends. And as she's looking at it, April, she sees that in the middle of the jail cell, if you will, is like this big metal box that's just sitting on the floor in the center of the cell, and then right above it, in the ceiling, is this pretty big cutout, like a hole in the ceiling. And so April sees this and takes in what she's seeing, and she can't really process it. She doesn't really understand what this is. And she's looking at her friends, and they're so horrified. They've been yelling out about something being real, like, what is that? Oh my gosh. And she's kind of looking back and forth, and then she sees it. She sees there's something else inside of this jail cell. And when she sees it, she recoils in horror. She grabs her friends, they sprint out of the funeral home, and they call the authorities. When authorities arrived, they went right down into the basement and they looked inside of that jail cell, and quickly they determined that April and her friends had not been alone inside of this building like they had thought. It would turn out 6 days earlier, a local man who had nothing to do with April and her friends, totally separate, had gone to this funeral home to have a look around. Except he wasn't an urban explorer. He was not going in here to have a good time or take photos. He was going inside to steal scrap metal and try to sell it for a profit. And so he made his way inside the funeral home, he looked around, he didn't really find much, but eventually went down into the basement. And when he got down there, he turned, he looked out at that space down there, and he saw this jail cell, this metal jail cell that just kind of sat in the middle of the basement. Except what he would have seen is just the bars that sort of surrounded the outside of the cell, the actual cell itself. The metal box in the middle that was on the floor that April saw and her friend saw, that was not there. And the hole in the ceiling would not have been there. He would have just seen basically a lot of metal in the middle of the basement. So he's thinking, I've hit the jackpot. This is exactly what I've come here for, to take this metal and go sell it. And so this man, he goes into the jail cell, into this cage, and he quickly realizes the actual metal struts that made up the cage, even if they were super valuable, they were thick and difficult to cut through, and so realistically, they were going to be really hard to extricate and get out of this place. But when the man is actually inside of this jail cell, this cage, he sees there's actually some other metal that he hadn't seen when he first came down that might be far easier to extract. Basically, right in the middle of this cell were additional metal rods that were running from the ceiling down to the ground. They were far thinner and easier to move around. And he's thinking, I could actually cut these and get these out of here and turn a profit on them, and then come back at a later date with, more people or more powerful tools to cut the metal that sort of was the cage, the stuff that he had originally seen. And so, feeling pretty optimistic, the guy put his stuff down, his phone, his wallet, his other things off to the side, in the cage. And then he got out his bolt cutters and he cut the very first one of these thinner cables right in the middle of the cell. And as soon as he cut one of them, there was this loud rumbling sound he would have heard right above him. And then this big metal box came crashing down and pinned him to the ground. It would turn out what this man had walked inside of was not a jail cell in the basement of the funeral home. It was actually the inner workings of something known as a casket lift. Basically, the funeral home has to raise caskets from the basement where potentially they're stored up to the main floor to be used. And, they're pretty cumbersome, big things that need to get moved around. And so effectively, they have an elevator that brings them up. And so that big metal box that came crashing down on this guy was the actual lift itself that actually carried up the caskets. And the cord that he cut were actually the cords that supported that lift. And so as soon as he cut one of them, he was cutting the support to effectively the elevator car that was right above him that then fell and crushed him. However, he didn't die from getting crushed. He just got trapped. And as soon as he realized he was trapped and being kind of crushed to death here, he reached for his phone, but he realized his phone was just barely outside of his reach. He couldn't get to his phone. And nobody knew he was here. This was an illegal activity. He didn't broadcast where he was going. And so he's stuck. He can't call anyone, and no one knows he's here. And so for 6 days, that lift gradually crushed this man to death. And then finally, when April and her friends showed up and they went down in the basement, they didn't just see, this destroyed casket lift. They saw this dead man's body, and he was literally outstretched, still reaching for his phone. On the morning of September 10th, 1987, Police Constable Dick Ellis walked into an interview room in a police station in South Yorkshire, England. Inside of this room was a table, and sitting on the other side of this table were these two security guards. One was named Stephen Brooks, and the other was named David Goldthorpe. And from PC Ellis's perspective, his first impression of these two guys is they were like big, burly, tough-looking men. He could tell they were both visibly shaken, like something had really rattled both of these guys. However, before Ellis could even sit down and begin asking basic questions about what was going on here, these two security guards just launched into this totally crazy-sounding story. The men told Ellis that the night before, they had been patrolling this construction site, where workers were building a 6-mile stretch of highway and bridge that were called the Stocks Bridge Bypass. Now, at this time of night, there was nobody at the site, no workers, nothing like that. And so really it was the security guard's job to make sure nobody entered the site and either tampered with equipment or tried to steal anything. Now, the night had been very routine and quiet until around midnight. It was at that point that David and Stephen, these two security guards, had reached the bridge, the half-constructed bridge portion of this bypass. And as they're walking along the highway and they see the bridge out in front of them, they stopped because they saw clearly there was a figure standing on this bridge. It almost looked like a man who was wearing a long jacket, like a cloak or something, and he appeared to be staring down below the bridge, down towards the valley underneath what the bridge was actually going over. Like this man clearly had not spotted the security guards. And so naturally, they began calling out to this guy, asking him like, hey, what are you doing here? What's going on? This is a private construction site, like you need to go. But the guy on the bridge didn't react. He just kept staring down to the valley below. And so at that point, as the two security guards are now walking in the direction of this guy, one of them lifts up his flashlight and shines it at this man. And when he does, the beam of light appears to just go through this man's body, like his body isn't solid, and the light just passed right through. And as soon as they did that, both Stephen and David just stopped, shocked at what they're seeing, aiming this light at the sky. And as they're doing this, the figure appeared to kind of turn and look at David and Stephen. And they were so unsettled and terrified by it that instead of protecting the construction site, they just turned and ran. And they went to the police. Now, after PC Ellis had been told this story, he did not believe in any way that what they had experienced was supernatural. He's thinking, okay, clearly, you saw some guy and, maybe he shouldn't have been there and maybe it was a trick of the light or something, or maybe that wasn't a person at all and you just thought it was. Like, who knows? But there has to be a logical, rational explanation here. And so feeling kind of annoyed that he was called in to deal with this, Ellis looks at these two guys and he's like, look, this is not a police matter. Why don't you guys, if you're so shaken up by this, go talk to the church or something. Like, this is not something we can help you with. And at that, the two security guards just said, okay, and they got up and they left. And Ellis, truthfully, didn't think about this at all. It was like, okay, great, that's done. I don't got to deal with that. And he went on with his day. But later that day, Ellis got a call from his boss being like, hey, did you tell two security guards who came in here to go talk to the church about some ghosts they saw at a construction site or something? And at this, Ellis had to kind of explain what had happened and how he had sort of flippantly told them to, go see the church if they really thought they saw a ghost. But his boss was like, well, they took you literally, and they are currently at the local church, those 2 security guards right now, and they are refusing to leave unless the church helps them with this ghost situation. And so Ellis's boss told him that you just need to go to the church, get these 2 guys to calm down, and leave. Go do that right now. And so Ellis is like, I can't believe they took that seriously. Okay, fine. So he hops in his cruiser, he goes to the church, he finds these 2 guys who are still totally shaken up, and they're pleading with people to take them seriously. Somebody needs to go out there and see what's on the bridge, see what this could have been. And Ellis is like, guys, I will tonight go to the bridge, I will check it out, I'll see what's going on there if you leave the church and you don't come back. Like, leave these people alone. And at this, David and Stephen, they're totally relieved. They're like, oh, you will? Oh my gosh, great. We'll leave, thank you, like, let us know what you find. And they left the church. And so they left, and PC Ellis is like, okay, great, I guess tonight I'm gonna go looking for ghosts. And so that night, around midnight, PC Ellis and his partner drove over to the construction site. Specifically, they went to the bridge. They got on the road that actually went underneath this unfinished bridge, and they camped out on this lower road. Looking straight up in front of them was this bridge. They're basically just gonna monitor this bridge because that's where the security guards claim to have seen this figure, this ghost. They're gonna stake out this bridge, see what happens, call it good. Now, at first, nothing happened on this bridge. Ellis and his partner just sat there, staring, bored up at this bridge, waiting for, the time to pass by so they could leave. But at some point, Ellis noticed movement up on the bridge, and so did his partner. Now, they couldn't quite tell what it was, and they couldn't even see if it was still moving around anymore, but clearly something had moved on the bridge. And so for a couple of seconds, Ellis and his partner are just staring really intently up at the bridge, waiting to see something else happen, but, nothing else did. And so Ellis is like, well, I gotta go up there and check because, maybe there is some guy who's trespassing on the construction site, and that's what the security guard saw. Like, I gotta go up there and see, because from down here, we really can't see too well. And so Ellis told his partner to just stay put in the car, that he, Ellis, would go up on the bridge and have a look around. And so Ellis, he got out of the car, all he had was a flashlight, and he began walking over to the bottom of this bridge. And there was actually a ladder he would have to climb up to the actual bridge, because remember, they're on the road below this bridge. And so Ellis, he gets to the ladder, he begins climbing up the ladder, and as he's going up, he's kind of staring up, almost expecting somebody to poke their head over, but it's quiet, no one's looking over the edge. And eventually Ellis gets to the top and he climbs onto the bridge. And again, it's this unfinished bridge, there's no traffic up here. And he looks roughly in the direction of where he thought he saw movement when he was down in the car looking up here, which also happened to be roughly the area where the 2 security guards had described seeing the figure that their light had shone through. And sure enough, Ellis looks and he sees there's this cloaked figure standing a little ways off of the side of the bridge, apparently just looking down towards his police car. And Ellis, at first, he's kind of shocked. He can't believe that, there's some legitimacy to the story these guys had told, and he couldn't help but be kind of frightened for a second. But then Ellis raised his flashlight and shined it at this figure, and as soon as he did, he just laughed. Because all it was a plastic tarp wrapped around some construction equipment. That's what the security guards clearly had seen. And when they shine their light, it's a clear plastic tarp here, the light could theoretically go through it. You can kind of see how they would think, oh my gosh, it's a ghost. And so Ellis is like, this is all this was. This was nothing. I knew it was nothing, and now I know it's nothing. And so after doing a cursory walk around the bridge to, make sure nobody was up there, and, he looked around, there wasn't anybody there, Ellis went back to the ladder, climbed back down, got in the car with his partner, and explained to him that this whole thing was a joke. And of course, there's no ghost, there's no criminals, there's nothing. This is no big deal. Now, Ellis and his partner could have, at this point, just left and gone home, but they had told their boss they'd come out here for at least an hour, and they'd only been here for maybe 30 minutes at this point. And so the 2 of them decided, you know what, just because we said we would, let's just stay here a little bit longer and make sure nobody goes on this bridge. We'll give it another, 30 minutes or so. And so Ellis and his partner just kind of sit back in their seats and settle in for this last little stretch of their shift. However, about 20 minutes into this final 30 minutes, Ellis is still just sitting there, his window's open, and he's just kind of doing nothing, waiting around. when suddenly he's hit with this unbelievably cold gust of air that comes into the car through his window. And it's kind of like sudden, like he's being hit with this gust of cold air. And then at the same time, Ellis began feeling this incredible pressure on his chest. Like it was so intense, he thought he was having a heart attack, and he wanted to say something to his partner, but it was like he couldn't even move. He's like frozen, he's getting scared, he doesn't know what's happening. And as much as he wanted to like yell out and get his partner's attention to help him, he suddenly had this overwhelming feeling that there was someone off to the side staring at him, someone right outside the car. And even though he didn't want to look, he found himself slowly turning and looking out his open window. And right there, immediately outside the door, is this man standing practically pressed up against the window. His torso is inches away from Ellis's face, just standing there inexplicably. Like this guy snuck up on them. They didn't even hear him. And so Ellis, at this point, he breaks out of his sort of trance. He screams and gets his partner's attention. And then he pushes open his door and he jumps out to confront this person who snuck up on them. But there's no one outside the car. And so Ellis, he turns to his partner and he's like, "Hey, did you just see what I just saw? Did you see that guy?" And Ellis's partner, who's totally ashen-faced, just looks at Ellis and he's like, "Yeah, I did see him." And so after looking around for a couple more seconds, Ellis climbed back into the car, and then he and his partner debriefed what had just happened. And Ellis's partner would tell Ellis that from his seat, he actually had a better vantage point than Ellis did to seeing this guy. I mean, Ellis was basically right on top of this guy, but his partner was a little bit farther back and had a better angle. And he would tell Ellis that at some point he had turned and seen the guy standing there, and the guy, he was wearing this old coat, this long coat that sort of looked like it belonged in the 1800s or something. And the partner would say, like, he didn't hear this guy approach, he didn't know how he got there, but at some point, he said the guy in the coat, the guy outside, crouched down just enough that he was looking in the car in the direction of Ellis's partner. And Ellis's partner said he was staring right at the guy, but the guy, he had no face. Ultimately, Ellis and his partner would return to the station that night, and they would file a report about what happened to them. But they would simply describe it as inexplicable phenomenon, and after filing it, they basically hoped they would never have to talk about it again. Except that wouldn't be possible, because shortly after filing that report, the construction was finished, and so the highway and the bridge were open to the public. And pretty much right away, people started dying on that bridge. Like a crazy high number of people just inexplicably would get in these fatal accidents on the bridge. And this bridge was not like especially hazardous. It was a beautiful brand new bridge. I mean, there really should not have been this many accidents. But it was not just that so many people were dying on this bridge inexplicably. No, also in tandem with all the fatal accidents were all the independently reported sightings of this dark figure standing on the bridge that had no face. So the leading theory amongst people who believe what's happening at this bridge is basically paranormal is that the construction of this bridge and the highway disturbed a gravesite, and that has led to all the tragedy and death that has followed. But they've never actually been able to prove if there really was a gravesite where this bridge or the highway was built. The two security guards, Stephen Brooks and David Goldthorpe, both quit their jobs. As for Ellis and his partner, they've never changed their stories, and they also have never found a reasonable explanation for what they saw. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.